Now that you've seen us convert an existing structure to a YAML file, that's the routes, we converted those over, and you're familiar with the YAML syntax pretty deeply, you're now in a position to better understand the conversion of the dependency injection container over to a YAML file. So again, if we hop over to our container.php file, you see that we create a dependency injection container here, and then we register various services to it, all the way down this list. And we already talked about how it would make sense to convert this over to a YAML file. So now let's see how that might be done. I'm going to jump back to the resource pack directory. And what we're going to do is copy this 8th step, services.yml, converting services to YAML file. So I'll go ahead and copy. And let's go over to our source folder where we just put our YAML syntax.yml and we'll paste it in and rename it services.yml. And now let's look at this side by side with our existing container. So I'm just going to split the screen here so we can see our services on this side, and we'll look at our container on this side. So now, if we go through this, even if we don't understand exactly why it has a structure, we should be able to understand the syntax. So first of all, we have a key, and then the key to that is an array with key value pairs. The key, in this case, is charset. The value is UTF-8. And then we have another item in the array. The key is services, and the value is an array. But then the value of each item in this array is also an array. The context array has one item in it. The key is class. The value is this full namespace here. The value of the matcher key is an array with two items in it, one for class, one for arguments. Inside of this arguments, we have this square bracket, which we've seen before. It just means it's a simple inline array. And then throughout this structure, we don't really see much that's more challenging than that. We see an array here, an array here, here, and then down here is probably the most complicated part. We have a simple array, and inside of each of these simple arrays is another array that includes another array. So calls is a simple array, and then within this we have an array. The first value is add subscriber. The next value is an array, and it just has one item in it, which is listener.router. So now let's draw parallels between the container.php file and the services YAML file. I'm going to scroll down just a little bit so we get to the point where we're setting a parameter. Okay, so we have our dependency injection container. That's this SC variable here. And we're using setParameter in order to set charset to UTF-8. So instead, we're setting a parameter section here, and then we have an item listed here. So my guess is that if we used setParameter multiple times, those would appear as additional items underneath this parameters key. Now this next section, where we're setting up the routes, is something that we're still going to have to do in our container.php file because it's dynamic. The one thing about YAML files is that it's really only intended to take static values. In this case, we're loading from another file, and we're using a specific YAML loader for it. And so for now, based on what we know at least, we'll need to set this outside of the YAML file. In this next line, we're registering a service called context. It aligns with this class right here. This is the class that's going to be instantiated in order to provide this service. And the way that lines up with the YAML file is we have this services array, and within that, we're setting the name of the service and then the class here. And then every time that we register an item in the dependency injection container using the register method, we're just adding an item inside of our services array here. The signature here is a little bit different for the matcher service because we're providing some arguments. And if we look at the set arguments section here, you can see that we have an array with routes and a new reference to context. So this looks a little different over here. We do have an array, and we recognize the square brackets as a simple array. The routes is identical to what we're seeing here. We just don't have the quotes. But then this at context is a little different. When we're using the dependency injection container directly, we have to create a new reference object to reference something else inside of the dependency injection container. However, when we're creating a services YAML file, if we use a special YAML parser, we can create a shortcut to an existing service by using the @ symbol. So this @ symbol aligns directly with creating a new reference object. So if we look at resolver here, it's a simple signature. We have resolver here with just a single class. If we look at listener router, this one takes one argument, which is a reference to the matcher service. And if we look over here, we're using the @ symbol again to reference the existing service inside of the dependency injection container. With our listener response, we're adding an argument for care set, which is what we defined up here or up here. And we're just referencing it the same way that we reference a parameter when using the dependency injection container directly. So we have routes and care set here. When we look at this more complicated structure down here, where we're registering the dispatcher and then we're adding various subscribers, again, what we're saying here is that when this object gets instantiated, we want to go through and run these methods as well. We want to run add subscriber, and we want to reference our different listener classes. So we have parameters being passed to an object instantiation, which in turn is an item in this array, which in turn is an item in a different array that gets passed to this add method call. When using a service's YAML file, though, we get to simplify that quite a bit. The different calls can be described by creating a simple array, and in the first item you have the method you want to call, and the second item is the array of parameters you want to pass to this method. As you can see, this is just easier to read than all of this code right here. Much simpler.